Welcome back to the deep dive. It is February 1st, 2026. And I have to say, looking at the MGF weekly for this past week, the one covering 26W5, I've been struggling to get a handle on it.
How so?
Well, on paper, it looks like a total mess. You've got
Okay.
headlines about drone strikes, currency shocks, the doomsday clock. But then my actual experience of the week, just being out in the world, didn't feel like a crisis. It felt strangely steady, almost muffled.
Muffled is a very good word for it. But I think we have to be careful not to confuse quiet with, peaceful. What we're looking at in this week's source material isn't an absence of trouble. It's what the report calls a high-pressure state maintained by silence.
See, that sounds like a contradiction in terms. High pressure usually makes a lot of noise. Things burst.
Usually, yes. But here, it seems to be by design. And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're not here to just summarize the news or, God forbid, predict what happens next.
Right.
We are just here to observe the structure of a week that somehow took on a huge amount of stress and didn't break. To do that, the report uses this mini-fields observation method.
I saw that in the notes. Mini fields. It talks about membrane tension. Is that just a fancy way of saying everyone's stressed out?
It's a little more than that. It's a way of looking at the system like a cell, not a machine. A membrane holds things in, it has tension, you poke it, it stretches.
If you poke it too hard.
It pops. The argument here is that the global membrane got poked and poked hard from multiple directions this week. War, markets, nuclear talk. And instead of popping, it just stretched. That stretching is the silence you felt.
Okay, I think I get the metaphor.
Yeah.
But let's make it more concrete. The report flagged 3 specific pressure points where things really should have blown up but didn't.
Exactly. We need to look at the security layer, the market layer, and the financial layer. So let's start with security. Let's start with Ukraine.
This was a tough part of the report to read. It calls the current phase Winter X Infrastructure X negotiation. And it's pointing out that the targets have shifted. We're not just reading about front lines anymore. We're reading about drone attacks on mine workers, on city heating systems.
It's a very grim turn, but from a structural point of view, you have to focus on what the report calls a speed and shear problem.
Speed and shear. Okay, what's that?
Think about the time it takes to break something versus the time it takes to fix it. A drone strike. That's instant, a fraction of a second.
Right.
Fixing a major power plant, especially in the middle of winter, that's months, maybe years.
So you have a timeline of destruction moving at light speed and a timeline of recovery that's just crawling.
Precisely. And then you layer a third timeline on top of that.
Yeah.
Negotiation. All this talk of diplomatic meetings and envoys, that's a slow, linear, bureaucratic process.
It assumes you have time.
It assumes that if you just talk long enough, you'll reach a deal. But the reality on the ground, the freezing cities, that's nonlinear. It's degrading much faster than the diplomats can talk.
So that's the friction. The diplomatic story is we're working on it, but the physical reality is we're running out of time.
And that gap creates this enormous unspoken pressure, the silence you felt this week. That's the sound of the diplomatic layer basically trying to pretend the physical layer isn't collapsing under its feet.
It's holding its breath. Because if it admits the timeline is broken, the whole thing falls apart.
Okay,
that's Ukraine. The second point, the Middle East, this one's even stranger to me.
the calcification.
Yes, we saw U.S.-Iran tensions spike. Now, normally for my entire adult life, if someone so much as looks funny at the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices jump $10. The markets panic.
Right.
But this week, the tension went way up and the market just shrugged.
It did more than shrug. It actively suppressed the reaction. And this is where we have to talk about the supply glut.
Which I assume just means there's too much oil around.
It's a bit more structural than that. It's about a known inventory overhang for, well, the rest of 2026. The people actually trading this stuff, the algorithms, they look at the data and they see a massive surplus. And that surplus is acting like a big, heavy, wet blanket on the market.
So even if a geopolitical spark lands on the blanket,
It just fizzles out. The geopolitical premium, the extra fear money that gets added to the price of oil, it's being suffocated by the physical reality of the inventory. The market structure is basically saying, we have too much of this stuff to panic about the politics right now.
That's fascinating. So the market isn't being irrational. It's being hyper-rational about one thing's supply to the point where it looks like it's ignoring everything else.
And that creates a disconnect. The headlines look like World War III is about to start. The price charts look like a boring Tuesday. That disconnect is another form of this structural silence.
The crisis is stuck in the narrative. It hasn't been allowed to drop into the operational layer. Which, I guess, brings us to the third point. The financial layer. the yen and the dollar. This one felt like it was buried by the other news, but it seems just as important.
The short, sharp shock?
The report called it a policy expectation loop. I'm no forex trader, but I know the yen has been a sore spot. What happened this week that fits this whole silence theme?
Okay, so we saw this very sudden, very sharp move in the currency rates that looked for all the world like a major central bank intervention.
Right, someone stepped in.
But here's the key. It wasn't officially announced or confirmed in the usual way. The market was under so much pressure that it essentially hallucinated an intervention.
Wait, what? It hallucinated it.
Think of it like a phantom limb. The traders are so convinced that the authorities have to do something that they start trading as if they already did it.
Wow.
And that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The price moves not because of a real policy, but because of the powerful expectation of one.
So it's a silence where everyone just agrees to pretend something happened in order to release the pressure.
In a way, yes. It absorbed the shock. The currency stabilized, but not because the fundamentals changed. It stabilized because the market's membrane just instantly priced in a rescue that hadn't even happened.
That feels incredibly fragile. You have Ukraine negotiating over a collapsing grid, the oil market ignoring a war because of inventory, and the currency market trading on ghosts.
It is fragile, but it's also, for now, functional. That's the paradox. The system held.
So if the system is holding together with what sounds like duct tape and wishful thinking, how are the people in charge talking about it? This was my favorite part of the deep dive, the GOA daily logs and the language analysis. It's
the language of buffer. This is how the silence is actually built, word by word.
So the report flags the words that spiked in usage this week, words like limits, transition, irreversibility, and non-linearity.
Now, just listen to those words. If I say to you, we are in a period of non-linear transition characterized by irreversibility, what have I actually told you?
Absolutely nothing concrete. It sounds very intelligent, but there's no action in there. There's no who, what, where.
And that is precisely the point. The report calls them linguistic shock absorbers. If a leader says our plan failed and we're losing, the market crashes. The membrane pops.
But if they say
we are approaching structural limits and must manage a new transition phase, it signals they see the problem, but it doesn't trigger the panic button.
So it's a kind of code, way of nodding to the other people in the room, I see the crack in the ceiling too, without telling the public to run for the exits.
I think it's even deeper. It's about sharing the burden of something that feels inevitable. Take irreversibility. That word was everywhere this week.
Right.
It implies a line has been crossed that we can't uncross, but it frames that as a law of physics, not a political choice. It is irreversible, sounds like gravity. We made a huge mistake. It sounds like someone's getting sued.
It removes the blame.
It removes the agency. And if you remove agency, you remove the immediate need for a solution.
But this is the part that really got me. It's not just the words they used. It's the words that were missing. The vocabulary hole.
This might be the single most important observation of the week. In a normal crisis, you hear very concrete questions. You hear who decides. You hear what stops, what continues, and of course, the most important one.
Who pays?
Who pays? Exactly. The ultimate concrete question. If you're going to rebuild Ukraine or manage an energy transition or fix a currency, somebody has to write a very large check.
And you're saying no one even asked that question this week?
The logs show a near total absence of that kind of cost assignment language.
But why? That just feels like denial. The problem doesn't go away if you don't talk about the bill.
It looks like denial, but the report argues it's something different. It calls it active non-finalization.
Active non-finalization. That sounds like a fancy term for procrastination.
It's more strategic. Imagine we're both holding up a heavy, cracking ceiling. We both know it costs $1 million to fix. If I turn to you right now and say, you need to pay for this, what happens?
We argue. And probably let go of the ceiling.
And the whole thing comes down.
Okay, I see it now.
Active non-finalization is us tacitly agreeing to just keep holding the ceiling and instead talk about structural dynamics and transition phases. Because the moment we try to finalize the bill, the coalition holding it up breaks. The silence about who pays is the load-bearing wall right now.
That is terrifyingly pragmatic. The entire global consensus depends on no one looking at the price tag.
For this week, yes. And notice the tone shift the logs found. In past years, abstract words were usually positive. Innovation, growth, future.
Yeah, hopeful words.
This week, the abstract words were about collapse, retreat, limits. We're using abstraction now to buffer the realization of loss, not to project hope.
It's like putting a silencer on a gun. The bullet still flies, but you don't hear the bang as loudly.
That's a very good way to put it.
So we have this tension, this silence, this linguistic fog. I want to go back to something the report called composite risk. It mentions the doomsday clock moving closer to midnight, which I usually dismiss as a bit of theater, but it's framed here as a rebundling. What does that mean?
It means the age of single-issue crises is over. For a long time, we treated risks like columns in a spreadsheet. Climate was in this column. AI risk was over here. Nuclear proliferation in another.
And we had different experts for each one.
Exactly. What this week symbolized is the rebundling of all of those into one single, interconnected crisis package. The system is starting to sense that you can't solve the energy crisis without solving the war, and you can't solve the war without addressing the currency problem.
It's all one big tangled knot.
It's fused, and that adds to that feeling of high pressure. It's not just one thing pushing on the membrane anymore, it's everything all at once.
But, and this is what I keep coming back to, I went to the store today, I bought coffee. The guy at the counter was talking about a football game. If the pressure is this high and all the risks are bundled together, why isn't daily life freaking out?
That is the split reality. The report calls it the disconnect between the N layer, the narrative, and the OS layer, the operating system.
Narrative versus operations.
Your narrative layer is the headline screaming, crisis, war, collapse. Your operating system layer, logistics, shipping, the guy stocking shelves at your grocery store is saying, I don't have time for that. I have a delivery schedule to meet.
So the operating system just keeps running on inertia.
On inertia and that calcification we mentioned, it's become resistant to the narrative. But this creates what the report calls a compatibility error.
Like trying to run new software on an old computer.
Pretty much. We're trying to run a linear operating system. Go to work, get a paycheck, expect prices to be stable. In a world where the macro structure is behaving non-linearly, it's changing in unpredictable exponential ways.
And for now, the silence is the only thing bridging that gap.
The silence is the buffer. It lets us continue our linear daily lives while this nonlinear storm is raging just over our heads.
You know, when we started this, I thought silence just meant nothing was happening. Now it feels like silence is the heaviest, most active thing in the room.
It is an immense expenditure of energy. Holding things together, not breaking, takes far more effort than letting them break.
So, of course, the question on my mind, and I'm sure on our listeners' minds, is what happens next? How long can this hold?
And stop right there.
I knew you were going to say that. No predictions.
The constraints of this dive are strict for a reason. The moment we try to predict, we fall into that narrative layer. We stop observing the structure and we start guessing.
Okay, fair enough. We're observers, not fortune tellers.
Yeah.
But if I can't know what's next, what am I supposed to do with this? It feels unsettling.
You don't have to do anything with it in terms of a grand solution. The value here is just in calibrating your own awareness.
Calibrate me then.
The only necessary observation from this entire week is this. The week remained unbroken under pressure.
It sounds so simple when you say it that way.
But just sit with what that implies. Despite everything we discussed, the grid attacks, the nuclear rhetoric, the currency phantoms, the week did not break. The structure held.
It absorbed the shock.
It absorbed it. So for you listening, you don't need to understand every detail of the yen carry trade or crude oil inventories. You just need to carry the awareness that we are in a state where not breaking has become the primary active work of the entire global system.
The goal isn't progress right now. It's just integrity.
Maintaining the status quo has become a high-intensity, full-time job. That's what the silence is.
And that puts a very different spin on things. When I see a scary headline next week and then nothing happens, I shouldn't think, oh, false alarm.
No. You should think the shock absorbers are working.
The shock absorbers are working. I like it.
Yeah.
It's less passive than the calm before the storm. It's vigilant.
It is active observation.
Well, on that note, I think that's a good place to leave it. We've unpacked the silence, the vocabulary hole, and the sheer work it takes to keep things from snapping. It's a lot to think about, but I feel like I understand the weirdness of this week so much better.
It's about seeing the architecture, not just the furniture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for walking us through that structure. And to you listening, thank you for diving deep with us. Maybe try listening to the silence this week. It might be telling you more than the noise. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Take care.